Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yes, yeah. Governments and people have something in common. Yes, yeah.
Now, I'm going to take you back to the day itself. I was there that day. I witnessed Bloody Sunday. I was with my brother Michael before he went to the march, and I told him, because of the fact that he was never on a march before in his life, to be careful if anything happened, to go home. And that was the last time I seen him alive. I myself was in the Bogside when the Parachute Regiment moved in, and I still remember to this day every second of what happened that day. And it's incredible that when the soldiers came to give evidence to the Savile inquiry, they couldn't remember a thing, because it looked as if there was collective amnesia. And you can understand the reason why they did it. By that, what they're doing, that was their defence. I do not remember. I do not remember. I do not remember. But I came under fire myself that day, like hundreds of other people, and I'm glad that I walked away from it. But I found out within 10 minutes my young brother had been shot, and I had to place him in the ambulance and take him to the hospital. I was with him when he was declared dead on arrival, and I was in the hospital when all the victims were coming in one after another. Somehow or other we got information back to my home, where my father came over to the hospital, living in hope that Michael was still alive, and I had to tell him that Michael was dead. And I still remember him sliding down the wall, crying in pain about his son. I then was in the mortuary, when I see 10 dead bodies. The place was covered in blood. There were bodies everywhere. And that still lives with me to this very day. We had to go home then and tell my mother that Michael was dead. And my mother up to that point was still living in hope, because, believe it or not, my mother followed Michael that day. And the reason why she followed him, he was a special son, due to the fact when he was a 3-year-old boy, he picked up a virus, which went to his brain. And he lay in a coma for 3 weeks. But he survived. And even at that time, the priest even said to my mother, give him up to God, and she refused to do so. And Michael came out of that. But he lived until he was 17 years of age, when he was actually murdered on the streets of Derry. So she followed him, and where she stood, looking out for her son, the soldier who killed Michael, murdered Michael, fired a shot from directly below her feet, as she stood looking out of a window in her sister's flat. And that soldier is Soldier F. Now, I can't tell you his name, but we know his name. We know all the killers' names. And I would be charged with contempt of court if I was to give out his name. So from then on, my mother was totally devastated by Michael's death. And she remembered absolutely nothing for 5 years. Because to her, it was a link taken out of the family. And there was times she was no good to herself. There was the sisters. I had 9 sisters, by the way, so I'm well used to women. I have 9 sisters. So all the sisters had to come back into the house to help my mother to try and get her through the bad times. But eventually she survived. But in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday, we had Woodgery, Lord Woodgery's report. And out of that came the vindication of the murderers and the guilt laid with the innocent. And we the families, at that time for 20 years, met once a year. And that was to commemorate Bloody Sunday. Until 1992, someone came up with the idea of setting up what was known as the Bloody Sunday Justice Campaign, and had 3 demands. One was the full declaration of innocence for our people. One was a full repudiation of Woodgery, and the third one was the prosecution of all those who committed and were part of the planning of Bloody Sunday. And we set out the campaign, and was made up at the beginning with about 8 family members. And what we were made up, I'm an engineer by trade, by the way. I was in the union too as well, I know about unions. But I was an engineer by trade. One was a housewife, one was a shop worker, one was a plasterer, one was a briggie, and so on. And we were ordinary people. And we were told at the beginning, and I don't want to say bad words here, but you haven't got a fucking chance. But we stuck with it. And we had many ups and we had many downs. And we've gained a lot of support from the people, even here in England, like the Troops Out movement, the British Irish Rights Watch. I could go on and on and on. Because people at the beginning thought the English were our enemies, but I know they weren't, and we all knew they weren't. And they came on board and supported us right through that campaign, until Tony Blair, eventually in January of 1998, announced a new inquiry into Bloody Sunday, which was the Savile inquiry. And to be truthful, if the Tories still had been in power at that time, we would never have had that inquiry. Let's be honest about that. So I believe that Tony Blair, or at least Kennedy, or whatever it was, he made the right decision. So the Savile report, the Savile inquiry began, and it lasted for 6 years. 6 years. Whereby there was evidence taking, there was a lot of information gathered, and 923 people gave evidence to the inquiry. Another 1,500 gave written statements to the inquiry. But the soldiers were the best of the lot. They were brave enough on Bloody Sunday on 30th of January 1972, command with their guns blaring, and were brave enough to come that day. But when they were asked to come to give evidence, when they were asked to come to give evidence at the new inquiry in Derry, we refused to do so because of fear for their lives. So what happened was that the families had to travel to London for 13 months. 13 months of travelling backwards and forwards. And I seen Soldier F for the first time. The guy who murdered my brother in the chamber giving evidence to the inquiry. And he showed absolutely no remorse, total contempt, and didn't give a damn. And that guy walked away and is still free to this day. He was never ever brought to book for what he did on Bloody Sunday. And we believe that Soldier F is responsible for at least 4 murders on Bloody Sunday. He murdered Michael, he murdered Wally McKinney, he murdered Paddy Doherty, and he murdered Barney McWigan. And he was also responsible for 4 injuries as well. So in total he shot 8 on Bloody Sunday, that one soldier. So he was a multiple killer, a serial killer, within about 6 minutes to 10 minutes of time. So the inquiry ended, and for over 5 years we waited for the report. We had a lot of delays, but eventually we got it on the 15th of June, just over 2 weeks ago. And it was the greatest day of my life, apart from marrying my wife, I can't apart from that. So that was a brilliant day for everyone. I remember we had a pre-read, as they called it. The solicitors were done at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we followed on at 10:30. And we ourselves, 56, 2 from each family, walked through the Guildhall and signed procession. And we walked through the Guildhall steps and up the stairs and into the chamber, and within 1 minute I knew my brother was innocent. I knew that he was murdered. And that was the a brilliant, most excellent moment of my life, to know that after all our years, 38 and a half years of campaigning, we had brought the Paris to book for the murder of our people. So we were at point 9, and I think we haven't come down yet, by the way, because it was a fantastic achievement, I think. It was a great victory. We beat them. We beat them. End of story. So now the report is now in the hands of the CPS, the PPS, in relation to prosecutions for murder and multiple murder and perjury. So that being the case, we are now waiting for the outcome of this investigation by the CPS. My campaigning days are done. I was a young man at 23 when Bloody Sunday happened. I had 1 child. I am now 61 with a grandfather of 5. So I think it's about time we took a rest. So thank you very much.